Good morning. Welcome
Good morning.
back to our journey through Tanya. Last week took us on a bit of a detour, as we spoke about at length in last week's class, how that was chapter 32, which, although an extremely fundamental and extremely powerful chapter of Tanya, really gave us the basis for our relationship with each other and how important the mitzvah of Avos Yisrael is. It kind of was off topic of the broader theme that we're discussing, which the broader theme we're discussing in these chapters is the importance of energy, of happiness, of a little pep in your step, the importance of serving God from a place of excitement, a place of joy. And we discussed at length in the chapters about removing different things that cause us sadness, and what we can meditate on and what we can focus on in order to go away from a place of sadness and into a place of happiness. Because as the Alter Rebbe said, when you have two people that are fighting, if one of them is energetic and one of them is lethargic, irrespective of their relative strength, the energetic person is going to win. And so if we, and by that we mean our godly soul, if our personality, if doing what we want to do is lethargic, if we're feeling bad about ourselves, then we're showing up to the fight half asleep and we're going to lose. And especially, we discussed in chapters 29, 30, 31, sort of how sometimes we have to specifically put ourselves down a little bit. And sometimes, if our issue is not necessarily about happiness and sadness, if our issue is more about apathy, I'm just not excited, then we have to remind ourselves, right? The reason why we're lethargic and apathetic, if it's not coming from a place of sadness, it's coming from a place of I just don't care. Why don't I care? Because my ego grew too thick, the coarseness got too coarse, and so I have to break it down, as we discussed in those chapters. But the problem is that those kind of thoughts can lead to sadness as well. And so in chapter 33, the Alter Rebbe continues with a powerful way of adding in our happiness. What can you do to become happy? We spoke about the treatments for sadness, but what can you do to add a little pep in your step? What can you do to get excited? What can you do to help yourself stay motivated with joy? And I think that, it used to be when soldiers went off to war or went on a long journey, what would you do? What would you bring with you? A little locket. Right? And so if ever you're feeling lonely, if you're ever feeling burnt out, you would open the locket. It was a picture of your loved ones, and that would remind you what you're doing this for. These days, we just keep it as our screensaver on our phone. You open it up, and there's a picture of your wife or your kids or someone important, and that helps you throughout the day, remembering what it's all about. And in many ways, that's what the Alter Rebbe is going to be doing here. If we're going through life, and either because of a specific challenge, or just more broadly, we're not feeling joyous, we're not feeling happy, there's not anything specific bothering us. If there is, go see chapters 26, 27, 28, 29. But this is more about just, I need something, I need a shot of adrenaline. What can I do to help myself become happy? And so the Alter Rebbe tells us we have to peek into the locket, we have to look at our home screen, our lock screen, and see what this is all about. And so we'll start on page 1. Oid zeis tia simchas hanefesh amitis, ubefrat kishereya benafshe be'itim mizumamim shesarich l'zachecha ula'ira besimchas halev. Yet another means of leading one's soul to true joy, especially at those specific times when one finds it necessary to purify his soul and illuminate it with the gladness of a heart. Azai yamik machshavtei v'yaz. Let him think deeply and picture in his intellect and understanding the subject of God's true unity. So, we'll take a moment here to talk about the idea of God's unity, because we discussed it at length in chapter 20 and 21, and the Alter Rebbe is going to briefly go through it here again, but we'll re-go over those points. When we say that God is one, right? The very basic understanding of that is that God is the only God. He doesn't have any partners. He doesn't have any subcontractors. There's no other godly force. It's just God. And then God created the world, and he created everything that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. But on a deeper level, God's unity, God is one, with a capital O. God is everything. Everything is included in God's oneness. There is only God. There's just that one. Now, how does that work? The fact of the matter is, I look around and I see a world. And I see a world that has, tables and chairs and other people, and has negative forces, and has wickedness, and has sin. How can we say that all of this is godliness? And very briefly, the answer is that God disguises himself. Now, for us, we see that disguise. When we look at God, we bump into that disguise on a day-to-day basis. But from God's perspective, it's like a one-way mirror. From God's perspective, everything is still him. If we use the example, again, this is from God's perspective, because from our perspective, our reality on a day-to-day level is I see a coffee cup and a table and a chair and someone that just cut me off. I see others. I see separation from God. I see things that are not godly. But all of those were created by God. And therefore, from God's perspective, they're really still part of him. And the Alter Rebbe is going to go through in a couple of ways reminding us how really, from God's perspective, everything that we see is still part of it. It's true for us as well, right? We just don't see it on a day-to-day basis. But the truth is that everything that we see, everything that exists, is part of God. And that is the true meaning of God's unity. Not only that there's only one God, that's also true, obviously, but that everything is God. Yes, from our perspective, that's not our day-to-day reality. That's not what I see. But as we gave the example of the mirror, right? It's a one-way mirror that you're standing in the showroom and you're looking around and there's a mirror on the wall. But you don't know that behind the wall is the business owner and they're keeping a very close eye on you. These days there's cameras, so one-way mirrors sort of went out of fashion. But that was sort of the idea that from your perspective, you see yourself, you see everything around you. But from the other side of the glass, the business owner is able to keep an eye on everything. I remember in my much, much younger years, when I was a student in New York, I went on a Friday Mivtzayim route. I would go every week to visit the same couple of stores and businesses and wrap tefillin and give Shabbos candles. And there was a furniture store. And I remember that we would go to the office, which was up sort of in the back of the store. We'd go up a couple of steps. And from outside, it looked like it was just a big mirror. But from inside the office, sometimes if my partner would spend a little bit too long talking, if I got a little bored, I was a young kid at the time, I would just, look out the window and watch the, people watch. Now, did they know that I was watching? Of course not. From their perspective, I didn't exist. But from my perspective, it's all laid out in front of me. And so from our perspective, the world is not a godly place. The world doesn't scream godliness. But the truth is, everything is. Not only everything, everything reflects godliness, everything is part of God. And as we discussed, how is everything part of God? When God created the world, how did he create the world? He said 10 utterances. God said, let there be light, let there be firmament, let there be clouds, let there be trees. God said the 10 phrases that created the world. Now, when we say something, the words leave our mouth, and they're no longer part of us. That's what we imagine speech is, right? That's the biggest mistake, not biggest mistake, but a big mistake people make is they say something without thinking about it, and it's too late. You can never take it back. There's a recorder on right now. If I say something stupid and it goes online, that's the end of it. I can never control that again. But then there are there is my internal thoughts. My thoughts that I, hopefully we think before we speak, and we think about the exact words that I'm going to say. My internal monologue is part of me. My internal monologue never got separated from me. My internal monologue is part of me. So with us, those are different steps. With God, that's all part of the same process. We discussed this more at length when we went through chapters 20 and 21, but there's sort of a domino effect, a cause and effect that happens when I want something to happen. First is, I want to do something. Right? I don't even know what I want yet. I just have a feeling, I feel hunger. Okay. So then my brain has to formulate a plan. Let me go get something to eat. How am I going to get something to eat? Oh, let me go ask someone let me go to a kosher pizza store and order a couple of slices. So my brain then forms the words, let me have a couple of slices. So far, those 3 steps, the feeling, the plan, and the internal monologue, are all part of me. Then we have that final step, which is I then go and say those words to someone else. And once I put the order in, again, it's out of my control. That has left me. But with God, that last step never leaves him. And so with God's process of creating a world, which follows along similar lines, God wanted it to be a world. He formulated a plan for it to be a world. He said the words to cause the world to come into being. That's all part of God. Which means everything, which on a molecular level, this is not a table. What is this? On a molecular level, it's a collection of atoms and things that we can't even sense. On a spiritual level, this is not a table. This is a collection of God's speech and God's words. And as we'll, this is the first section of Tanya. In the second section of Tanya, called Shara Yichud Ve'emunah, which means the gate of unity and belief, the Alter Rebbe describes exactly how everything is part of God by this process. Because everything is created by God's speech, the same way it's made up of atoms, it's made up of God's speech. And by God, his speech never leaves him. And therefore, everything in the world is part of God. Now, do I sense that? No. I see a table. I don't see the physical, I don't see the spiritual makeup of the table. I see a table. But that's my problem. That's because I'm looking at a one-way mirror, not because that's the true reality. Continuing on page 2. Right? So again, just to summarize what we just said on the last page, was that we have to think deeply about God's unity. Let him consider how God, permeates all worlds, both upper and lower. The spiritual worlds and the physical worlds are all permeated and all are God. Let him further consider how even this world is filled with his glory. And how everything is of no reality whatsoever in his presence. He is one alone in the upper and lower realms, just as he was alone prior to the 6 days of creation, when nothing existed apart from God. So too now, when all the worlds have come into being, he is still one alone, since all of creation is not before him, and will be further explained further. Even in the very place where this world, the heaven, the earth, and all their hosts was created, he alone then filled this space.
Question.
Yes.
I'm pausing on the prior sentence. Kulo kame kula hashiv mamash. How everything is of no reality whatsoever in his presence. I don't have a grasp of that concept.
This is this phrase of how when we're talking about God's perspective and God's presence, nothing has any reality. Last time we spoke about this subject, I gave the example of a hair growing on our head. Right? When we're sitting here and I'm alone in a room, if I'm alone in a room and then somehow, instead of losing all my hairs, I grow one extra hair, does that reality change? Am I now suddenly not alone in the room anymore because there's an extra hair on my head? Of course not. First of all, it's part of me. And second of all, it's so insignificant relative to the rest of me, it's as if it doesn't exist. No one's going to make any difference between before that hair grew out and after that hair grew out. Now, is there an actual difference? Of course there is, because now there's an extra hair. And if we're counting up all the hair follicles in the room, well, now there's an extra one. But from my perspective, from my reality, there is actually no difference. How much more so by God, where the entire existence of everything exists within his mind. Right? Let's take that thing even further. If I'm sitting alone with my thoughts, and then I have one more thought. Am I suddenly not alone with my... There's no difference before and after. Do I have a new thought? Absolutely. But nothing changed before and after. Because A, it's so insignificant relative to the rest of me. And B, it's part of me. It never left me. It's still, I'm the only one here. And that's exactly what God's reality is. Is there a difference from our perspective before and after the world was created? Of course. Before there was nothing, and now there's everything. There's time and space and everything else. But from God's perspective, because A, it's so nullified compared to Him, it's so insignificant compared to Him, and it's still part of Him. So from God's perspective, it's as if it doesn't exist. There is no difference before and after.
Thank you.
Of course. Right? And just like before the world was created in 6 days, before the world was created, it was just God. Now it's also just God. As you continue on page 3, Gam ata kain hu levade bli shum shinei klal mipnei kol shekol neviim betelim etzlei b'metzias mamish. The same is true now, for He is one alone without any change whatsoever. For in relation to Him, the very existence of all created beings is utterly nullified. So from His perspective, as it were, everything remains just as prior to creation. And here, the Alter Rebbe goes into that analogy of letters. And the same way that my internal monologue is nullified compared to me, it's consumed within me. It's A, so insignificant, and B, part of who I am. So too it is with the world relative to God. Continuing on page 4. Kibitul eisius hadibur v'hamachshava b'makirim v'sharshan hu mahus hanefesh v'atzmusa shehin ese bechinas chachma b'nadas. All created beings are nullified before God, just as the letters of speech and thought are nullified within their source and root, i.e. the soul's substance and essence, meaning its 10 faculties, chachma bina das, and the midos. She'im behem b'chinas eishis adayim koidem shemislabish b'levush b'machshava commission is bar prakim chaf v'chaf alef barichas ayin sham, in which are no letters yet prior to their being clothed in the garment of thought, as has been explained at length in chapters 20 and 21. See there. When the words that actually form are nullified relative to my internal monologue. They're so insignificant relative to my internal monologue, which is nullified and so insignificant relative to the feeling and the plan that caused that internal monologue, relative to the feeling that caused everything to happen. Again, as we know, in our example, my hunger led to my feeling of hunger, led to a plan to get food, led to an internal monologue of what I'm going to order, led to the actual words coming out of my mouth. And at each stage, it gets completely nullified because it's so insignificant relative to the actual plan behind it, as we explained at length in chapter 2021. And I'll take a cue from the Alter Rebbe and not go too much back into that vortex. But the recordings are up on YouTube if anybody wants to follow up and review exactly how this works. Now the Alter Rebbe is going to give us a physical example in the world around us where we see this phenomenon. How something can feel like it exists, but because it's inside its source, or because it's so close to its source, it's nullified, it's worth nothing. And I'll invite everyone to take a look around this room. And although there are lights on top of us, they're not very bright. Right? If we can turn them off, and it's happened in the past, we started a class, we didn't even realize the lights were off. Why? Because we have big windows in this room, letting in lots of sunlight. And the sunlight is incredibly powerful. The sunlight, it's the difference between night and day if there's sunlight or not. And right now, when I look out the window, I see that light that's illuminating everything. What if I do something really stupid, and I walk outside and look up directly at the sun? Do I see the sunlight anymore? No. I'm blinded by the sun itself. Yes, is there technically sunlight coming into my eyes? Of course there is. But because of the relative power of the source itself, of the sun, the light seems like it's not there. It gets nullified relative, which by the way is the same thing that's happening to the lights in this room. You know, if you light a candle right now outside, are you going to see the light of the candle? I mean, technically probably. But realistically, it's nullified relative to the much greater sunlight, and the sunlight itself is nullified relative to the sun itself. When you look directly into the sun, don't do that. This is not medical advice. But if someone were to do that, suddenly they're not perceiving the sun anymore. They're just seeing the sun itself. Why? Because when it's in its source, it's nullified. Yes, it's the most powerful light that we know of. But relative to its source, suddenly all I see is the source. And that's the difference when I see things, when I'm looking out the window and I see sunlight, versus when I'm looking directly at the sun. When I'm looking directly at the sun, I don't perceive all of the rays of light. I'm blinded by the sun itself. And so when we see things from God's perspective, which we're working towards, how we sort of, that's the next step. But when I see things from God's perspective, suddenly all of the obstacles and all of the things that I look around and I see things that are not godly, they're no longer perceived. They're completely nullified relative to God himself. As we continue on page 4. Commission is bar gam came b'makim acher, mashal gashmi lazeh, me'inyin bitul ziv v'or hashemesh b'mkoirei hu guf kader hashemesh b'rakia. Elsewhere, this idea is further illustrated by an analogy from a physical phenomenon. The nullification of the sun's radiance and light within its source, the celestial orb of the sun. Shagam sham meir umispashit vaday zivei va'erin biyeses seis mishpasusei va'yose b'chol ha'olam elo shesham hu batum b'mtzias m'keder ke'ilu eina b'mtzias klam. For surely its radiance and light glow and spread forth thereto, more strongly in fact than they spread forth and glow in the space of the universe. Being close to its source, the light is more intense. But there, within the sun, its very existence is nullified within that of its source. It is as though the light was absolutely non-existent. All that is seen within the sun is the sun itself, not the light, which is merely a product and offshoot of the sun. So yes, you might be seeing, maybe the rays that are closest to the sun are the strongest, but you don't see that. Because they're close to the sun, they get blinded, they get nullified by the sun itself. We don't usually read the paragraphs in the middle, but that first line, right, of what good is a candle in daylight? If you have daylight, the light of the candle is completely nullified and non-existent. Continue on page 5. Kacha mamish derech mashal hu bitul ha'olam umloi b'metzias lagabe mokere shehu aryin seif baruch hu k'mei shezbar Hashem baruch. Exactly so, figuratively speaking, is the very existence of the world and everything in it nullified in relation to its source, which is the light of the Ein Sof, as explained there at length. Okay, so now this is going to be a multi-step meditation. If we need to infuse joy in our day, Joy's not here today, so we'll have to infuse it ourselves. If we're not able to if we need to infuse joy, what do I do? Step 1 is meditate on this idea, and I will acknowledge this is one of the most advanced Kabbalistical topics, because we're saying words. But for us to truly appreciate what this means, for us to really start perceiving this and understanding this, is quite the challenge. But when we start to work in that direction, and we realize that this world is really part of God. Everything in this world is really God. Suddenly, I feel extremely close to God. Because what's my job in this world? My job in this world is to make that reality clear. To make this place, right? We're about to say one of the foundational lines of Chabad philosophy. In fact, the Rabbi instituted exactly 50 years ago, in 1976. The Rabbi instituted an idea of there's 12 passages, some of them from the Torah, some of them from the oral law, some of them from Chassidus, 12 passages that every child should know. And if you ever at a gathering of Chabad children, there's 12. It's called the 12 Psukim of Amar Chazal, the 12 verses and teachings of our sages.
Where do we find that?
So it's. I'm trying to think if there's anywhere offhand that I can. Wonder if they included in the Blue Siddur. I don't know if they did. It's very the. Give me 1 second. Actually, I think they might know there are some.
I'm aware of this, and I have to see it. Thank you. I didn't mean to disrupt the class.
No, your question is timely, Gershon.
I need to see these 12 verses.
So there was for a while a booklet hanging around somewhere here. It might be on one of the shelves, so we'll look around after class. I'll see if I can find it. But it's a very easy to look up. It's the 12 psukim, as it's called, and these are the 12 first things we teach our children. Torah tziva lanu Moshe merosh kehilas Yaakov, establishing, teaching our children that the Torah is our inheritance. And these 12 passages, 2 of them are from this chapter in Tanya. Because the one that we're about to read is a reminder. And I'm not going to get distracted by a whole talk about the 12 psukim. We can have another discussion about that. But is a reminder that what is our purpose on this world? When it's all said and done, what is our purpose on this world? To make a dwelling place for God on this world. Now, God doesn't need a bedroom. God doesn't need a house. What exactly does it mean that this world becomes a home for God? So, as the saying goes, home is where you hang your hat up. Your heart is. That's one of the versions. But home is where you hang your hat up. What does that mean? What does it represent? It represents home is where you're comfortable. Home is a place that's tailored to you. It's your domain, right? One of my a milestone. The different siblings that purchased homes or moved into places or built homes or people that I know. One of the milestones is when you renovate your kitchen, and you renovate it as a kosher kitchen. Most homes have one sink, but when you renovate it as a whole second sink, suddenly you feel much more at home. Why? Because now it's built for you. This is your domain. It's where you're comfortable. It's where you can be yourself. It's built for you. And that is what we're doing on this earth. We are creating a place where God feels comfortable. Where right now I look around and what do I see? I don't see godliness. If God were to come down, if God, I'm saying words that don't really make sense because God is already here. God doesn't have to come down to this world. But if God were to reveal himself right now in this world, would he be in place or out of place? He would be out of place. The world is not built on spirituality. The world is not built around spirituality, not built around godliness. Our job is to do mitzvos in order to create a place where that reality that this is a godly world becomes more and more apparent, and therefore God is comfortable here. Yes, David, you've been waiting patiently.
Yes, Rabbi. I want to ask a personal question.
Sure.
How old will your son be before he learns these 12 verses of the word?
So he already knows them. I don't know if he knows that he knows them. He doesn't know them by heart, but every day when we drive to school, we listen to it's called a sing-along sitter. It's like different portions from the sitter and different things, and our drive is only a half hour, so the tape is like 47 minutes or something. So the last little bit are those 12 verses. But the ideas and sort of, so when we get delayed or if we play it again in the afternoon, he listens to them. And whenever we gather them together, we start them off. If you go over to any of both of my older boys who can talk, or any of my nieces or nephews, and tell them Moshe, tell them Torah Tziva, they'll finish off the verse. Because this is how do we instill, we talk about educating from a young age. This is how we instill from a young age. They don't understand Tanya from this. They understand the purity of the words, and then as they get older, we teach them the concepts behind it. And I would highly, highly recommend taking a moment, and God willing, if you can find the booklet, I'll go through it after we're done with the Tanya for today. But these are the 12 principles that the Rebbe handpicked from across the plethora of teachings and verses and everything, that these are the foundational principles. These are a good place to start. Not where Torah teaching ends, but it's where the Torah teaching starts.
So before the age of 5?
Absolutely. And more people who know more advanced children, know them by heart. When I was a kid, I knew them by heart. I've slipped a little bit. I've moved on to more advanced topics. But the 12 passages are this incredibly fundamental, and this is one of them. Why? Because as it's from the end, I think this is number 11, because this is a bit of an advanced concept. But as we go through life, constantly returning to our, default location, remembering, what am I doing here? My job is to create a place where God feels comfortable, which really means revealing what this world is all about. This world is a godly place. Does it look godly? No. But that's up to me to fix. And that's my job. Every morning when I get out of bed, I have to jump out of bed with a song. I have an incredible mission God has entrusted with me. God wants to live here. God wants to move in, as the Alter Rebbe is going to continue to explain. And it's up to me to get this job done. You have a question?
I think you're answering something that's going through my mind all the time. Our relationship with God, what He wants from us. There are two questions. One is expectation and the other is wanting. What does God expect from us and what does He want from us? Because they are different.
So,
I know when
depending
you say expectation, obey the commandments.
So I'll actually flip that. And depending on what we're learning, this answer will be a little bit different. But what does God want from us?
Yeah.
He wants us to do godly things. Now, how do you define godly things? Look at the 613 commandments. Those are godly things.
Okay. Mitzvahs.
Mitzvahs. What does He expect from us? To do our best. To do our best. We're human, and He knows exactly the limitations. He demands that we do our best. What does He want from us? To do godly things. As defined, not by godly the way I define it. If I want to be godly by dancing on the rooftop, that's not, I mean, it's a mitzvah to be joyous, but it has to be a tangible thing that God told us that He wants, but He wants us to do godly things. And then what happens? I make the world a more godly place. I get one step closer to this being God's custom-made home. Being a place where God feels comfortable. Tailor-made, I shouldn't say custom-made, God's tailor-made home, special for Him.
So, on festivals, when we dance around the bima.
Yes, that's a mitzvah. What song do we sing? V'samachta b'chagecha. Be joyous on your holidays. V'samachta b'chagecha. Right? That's what we're singing because that's a godly thing. Me deciding that I want to dance around, on the roof is not strictly a mitzvah in the strictest sense. No. But dancing from joy because of a mitzvah is absolutely part of it. That was an interesting tangent we had on to about dancing. I don't know how we got there, but bringing it back to our discussion here. Continuing on page 5. Hine kishiyamik bazeh harbe. Right? When you reflect on this, the fact that everything in the world is really God, and everything in the world is really godly. If you peek behind the veil, if you peek through the one-way glass, everything in the world is really godly. Now, when one contemplates deeply and at length on this matter of God's true unity, his heart will rejoice with his faith, his soul will be gladdened by it, to the point of rejoicing and singing with all his heart, soul, and might. Why? What's so exciting about that fact? Ki rabahi kihi kirvas elikim mamish. For this faith is tremendous. When it fills one mind, it actually constitutes an experience of closeness of God. These next two lines are the quote from the 12th Pesukim. This, in fact, is the whole purpose of man, and the purpose for which he and all the worlds, both upper and lower, were created. That God should have such a dwelling place here below, as will be explained further at length, how this earthly abode for God is the purpose of all creation. This is the purpose of everything. Why did God create the world? In order for us to make Him a home. In order for us to turn this world into a home for God. And as soon as you realize that, our purpose is to make this a home for God, and the incredible power that we have, we realize, good morning, that God wants to move into my house. God wants to be close with me. Right? God doesn't demand from us to leave this world. He doesn't want us to leave this world. God wants to come to this world with us. Imagine the most impressive person, the most special person you know, calls you up and says, "Hey, I want to crash on your couch for a couple of weeks. I want to hang out with you." let's go catch a coffee. Let's go get some coffee. Let's go catch a ball game. Whatever it is, I want to hang out with you. Not come to my office and meet me on the 100th floor in my palace, depending on who we're talking. I want to come hang out with you where you are. That's an incredible closeness. It's an incredible joy. That person wants to come, not drag me up to their level, not that I have to stop being who I am and go up to their level, but God wants to come down into this world to hang out with us, if you can say such words. As you continue on page 6, V'hine kama gdela simchas hedzik v'shafal anashim behi skarvusay lamelech basar v'dam hamis askin v'der itay imei babayis. How great is the joy of a common and lonely person when he is brought close to the King of flesh and blood, who furthermore lodges and greater still dwells together with him, not in the king's palace, but in the commoner's home. How much more, infinitely more, ought one we rejoice in the nearness of the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, and His dwelling together with man in the physical world, man's home. For it is written, for who is the man who dares to approach me, says God. Right? Generally speaking, the gulf, the division between us and God is like us walking up to, I don't want to say the White House, but walking up to Buckingham Palace and saying, I want to go have tea with the king. Who are you to even approach? And yet, the king calls us up and says, hey, let's go grab a beer. That's the relationship we're talking about now, multiplied 1,000,000 times over. Right? We're not even in the same realm. And so, this ability to make God's home, to make our world God's home, is our incredible privilege. God chose us, and by us I mean specifically the Jewish people, and by extension all of humanity, to make this world a dwelling place for God. And therefore, we're excited about it. Therefore, we're happy about it. As he continues, for this ability to experience and to be absorbed in God's unity, right? How do we get absorbed into God's unity? By making this world, by revealing how this entire world is really part of God's unity and making it a home for God. It was instituted by the sages that one should render praise and thanks to God's name each morning, saying, Ashreinu matevchakenu u'maychulu u'mayafu yerushaseinu. How fortunate are we, how good is our portion, how pleasant our lot, and how beautiful our heritage. Now, there's different joys. Right? The Talmud famously says that you have a much deeper appreciation for the work that you've done yourself. Right? Someone wants the joy of having done it themselves, the sense of accomplishment, rather than being gifted something. But there's also a very pure joy when you suddenly get an inheritance. Something you didn't work for, you didn't earn. All you did to merit this is you happen to be born into the right family, and suddenly you get a tremendous inheritance. There's a joy, a pure happiness that comes out of them. Which, there's a joke, just to lighten up the mood a little bit. But the rabbi visiting one of his congregants, and the guy is extremely sad. He's depressed. He's complaining how bad things are. I said, I don't understand. What's going on? Why is things sad? He said, you don't understand, Rabbi. A month ago, I got a certified letter in the mail that some aunt I never met passed away and left me $1 million. Doesn't sound that bad. Let me continue my story. Last week, 2 weeks ago, I got a call, a lawyer, an executive of an estate, some long-lost cousin passed away and left me $500,000. Again, the rabbi's like, I don't understand. Just let me finish. Last week, I got another call. Some other distant relative who I never knew left me their boat. The rabbi says, again, Rabbi, you don't understand. This week, nothing at all. That happiness, that joy that we get from an unsolicited, right? Just we open up the mail, and there's an unexpected gift, an inheritance. Right? The thing about inheritance is we do nothing to deserve it. Even a gift, usually, a gift comes from some. Very rarely is there a completely for absolutely no reason we get a gift. Usually the only time that happens is this is inheritance. We happen to be born to the right family. As the saying goes, misers make great ancestors. And we got left a generous inheritance. That joy that we feel, that is a joy that every single one of us, especially Jewish people, feel. We have this opportunity that's so beyond us, right? Because us as people, again, we walk up to the palace gates, we get sent flying. And yet God calls us up and says, I want to come hang out with you. Do a mitzvah so I can come dwell with you. Kolemar, Kemeisha Adam Sas v'Sameach b'Yerusha Shenaflu Loi Hein Asek Shalei Amalvei. In other words, just as a person rejoices and glad when an immense fortune falls into his possession by inheritance through no toil of his own, Kain v'Yesum Kain le'in Kates Yishlanu l'Smayach Ayushasenu She'inchilu Avisenu. Similarly, and infinitely more so, ought we to rejoice over the inheritance which our forefathers bequeathed to us. What is that inheritance? Continuing in page 7, Yichud Hashem Amiti, Asher Afilu Ba'eret Tachtin Ein Eid Movade, Zuhi Dirase B'Tachtenim. This inheritance is the true unity in God, of God, that even here below on this earth, there is nothing else besides Him alone, that this is His abode among the lowly beings of the physical world, when they are pervaded by the awareness of God's unity and nullify themselves before it. We have the opportunity to unify God, as it were, to express and experience this unity. This world is a godly place. We get to experience it. We get to make that real to ourselves. And that's a special gift that we have by inheritance. V'zeu she'amar Razal, Tayag mitzvahs nitlu Yisrael, Bachar bakuk v'midal achad she'nemar v'tzadik v'menaseh yichya. This is the meaning of our sages of blessed memory. These 613 mitzvahs were given to Israel. Came Habakkuk is one of the prophets, and based them all on a single one, faith. As it is written, a tzaddik lives by his faith. So Habakkuk said the verse that a tzaddik, a righteous person, lives by his faith. And our sages said, what was he doing? He was basically he was establishing all 613 commandments are based on faith alone. Now on a simple level that makes sense, right? I only do the commandments because I believe in God. But here the Alter Rebbe is explaining a much deeper level in that relationship. Why? All mitzvos are an opportunity to express and experience my faith in the one God, right? Faith. What is my faith in? My faith is in God is one. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, Lord our God, the Lord is God. That is our expression of faith. Our faith is that God is one and God is the only one. Suddenly, every other mitzvah becomes an opportunity to experience that unity. Becomes an opportunity to make real for myself that unity. As we continue, Kleimar ki'ilu eina rak mitzvah achas hi amuna levad kal yidei amuna levad yavel lekim kol te'ag mitzvahs. This means it is as if all the mitzvahs consisted of this one mitzvah of faith alone. For through faith alone, one will come to fulfill all 613 mitzvahs. If I have faith, and here the Alter Rebbe is expanding on the meaning of faith, if I have an understanding, if I have a belief, if I live by the fact that there is only one God, and God is everything, and my job is just to make that real, suddenly all the other mitzvahs fall into place. Dahainu, k'sheyiyah li b'sas v'sameach b'munasa b'yuchad Hashem b'tachas ha'simcha, ki'ilu lo yhoisa alav rak mitzvah zu levada, hi levada tachas v'yis kol ha'elames. That is, when his heart will rejoice and be glad with his faith in God's unity, in perfect joy, as though he was obligated by just this one mitzvah, and it alone were the purpose for which he and all the worlds were created. Surely, if there was but one such mitzvah for him to do, he would fulfill with the utmost joy. Harei b'koyach v'chayis nafshi b'simcha rabba zum zay his ala nafshi l'mayla meila al kol amanim l'kim kol te'ag mitzvahs v'bayis mechutz. If let him thus rejoice in the mitzvah of faith, and by the power and vitality of his soul, generated from this great joy, his soul will soar far above all obstacles, hindering his fulfillment of the 613 mitzvahs, both obstacles from within, from one's animal soul, and from without, arising from one's environment. And there's a few levels here. When I have this joy, when I'm able, which, next chapter is going to be taking this idea to a little bit of a more practical level. But let's talk about what the Alter Rebbe is talking about. Let's talk about this utopic view that I'm able to have of the world. I'm able to realize and live with the fact the entire world is God. And I have the blessed and joyous opportunity to make that real, to experience that. If I have that real joy, right? If I have that excitement in my life, everything else falls away. Which commentaries of the Tanya explained, especially considering that, what does that mean? It means that all of my obstacles are really part of God as well. If all my obstacles are part of God, then there's smoke and mirrors, and if I can really appreciate how everything is God, it means my obstacles are part of God, and as soon as I try hard, they fall away. But even on the simpler level, if the king tells me he wants to come for dinner, or he wants to come move in, suddenly, in my excitement, all of the obstacles, and for months I couldn't motivate myself to clean my house, suddenly right now it happens in 20 minutes, because the excitement pushes through all of the obstacles. And that's what Habakkuk was saying, that if I'm able to live by my faith, if I'm able to make that faith real as if it was my only mitzvah, how excited would we be about if we only had one mitzvah? If I get super excited about my faith, all the other mitzvahs just fall into place. Because I believe and I understand in the unity of God, and everything else is just a means to getting to that end. And therefore, that faith motivates me. As he continues on page 8, V'zeu sha'amar be'amunasa yichya. Yichya daika ketchias hamesim derech mashal kach tichya nafshe besimcha rabazu. Thus, the expression Yichya, will live, in the verse Tzaddik will live by his faith, is meant in the sense of will be revived, as though resurrected from the dead. So his joy will be revived by this great. So soul will be revived by this great joy. When I have this joy, I'm able to push through all the boundaries. And so, going back to the beginning of the chapter, if I need a bit of a kick in the pants, if I need a bit of a shot of adrenaline, a shot of joy, think about what I'm doing. I am actualizing, I am representing, I am realizing God's unity in this world, how everything is really God. And that joy leads to another joy. God's joy. And of course, everything from here to the end of the chapter is spoken with a little bit of metaphoricalness, because God having joy or God being sad, these are not real things that we can put on God. But the idea of we are doing God a favor. Because if God wants to come live with us, and we say, yes, I just created a home for you, that causes God to be happy. It causes God to be joyous in the fact that his mission, that his request is being fulfilled. If the king reaches out to you and says, I want to come have dinner, and you say, great, I put in all the effort, now we can fulfill your wish, you can have dinner in my home, now the king is happy too. I'm happy and the king is happy, and in fact, the more work, the more absurd the king's request is, when I fulfill it, the happier the king is. Right? If the king says he wants to come have dinner in my mansion and it's already ready to go, all right, he's happy about that. But if the king wants to come to my dingy dark basement, and there's where he wants to go, for whatever reason that's where the king wants to go, and I say okay, and I put in the effort and make that a place where the king is comfortable, that joy is so much higher. And so the very fact that where is this whole battle, where is this whole conversation happening? Here in the lowest physical realms. That makes God the most joyous of all, as we're about to read in the Tanya. V'hi simcha kfula u'mechupeles ki milvad simchas hanefesh hamaskeles b'kirvat Hashem v'yaseh itay imay. This is a double and redouble joy, apart from the soul's joy upon apprehending how near God is to him and how he dwells together with him. He will also rejoice doubly in the joy and pleasure which his faith brings to God. For thereby, again, through my faith, anything is possible. I can overcome any obstacles, and I can bring God's light into the lowest parts of the world. And thereby, through one's faith in God's unity, the Sitra Achra. Again, just as a reminder, Sitra Achra literally translates to the other side. It means anything that is not godly, any impurity, any wickedness, any unholiness, is truly subdued. With darkness is transformed to light. Meaning the darkness of the klippos, of this corporeal world, which obscure and conceal God's light, Aden Kates, Kameshikosov, Kates Shamacheshech, until the end of days, as is written, he sets an end to darkness. This reality, before we get to the brackets, this reality, when are we going to experience that this is a godly world? David is asking about what my children are up to these days, and their thing. One of their big questions is, what does Hashem look like? What does God look like? Can I see God? Now, when am I going to be able to see God? So, on a very basic level, right? I can't explain to them. We can't really perceive God as a form. But when are we going to see God? When are we going to look out into the world and instead of seeing physicality, we'll see spirituality. Instead of seeing ungodliness, we'll see the world for its godly place? When Mashiach comes. When we finish our mission, when we've done all the work that's up for us to do, God will come in, finish the job, and suddenly the world will just be a godly place. Which is why, Maimonides talks about when Mashiach comes, all bad things will go away. But he also says the world will continue running as normal. How do those things coexist? Because the world will continue being a world, except that godliness will be obvious. You get into a fight with someone when godliness is obvious. You're going to be jealous of someone when God's plan is obvious. You're going to get into all of those things come from an absence of godliness, from the fact that godliness is hidden in this world. Sickness and fighting and war, all of those things come from an absence of godliness. When Mashiach comes, godliness will be revealed. We'll be able to perceive how the world is a godly place. And that's what we're working towards. Until we get to that point, we're working towards that. As it continues on page 9, this biblical phrase, the end of days, is written Ketz Yamim, since Yamim in Aramaic means days and Yamin means right. The phrase thus intimates that in the end of days, Hashem will reveal his right hand, a reference to his attribute of revealness, when he will banish the spirit of impurity from the earth, and God's glory, the godliness within each created being, will be revealed, and all flesh together will behold it. That is to say, not only the mind, but even the very flesh of man will perceive godliness, as will be explained further. So, the more distant we are from godliness, the more God appreciates us living with this faith. This is especially so in the diaspora, where the atmosphere is unclean and filled with klippos and sitra achra. Right? Eretz Yisrael, our holy land, is holy. It's a place where godliness is a little bit more revealed, it's a little bit more obvious. In fact, the Rabbi was not for everyone, just universally, everyone has to make aliyah. Maybe was very for that wherever we end up in life is because we have a mission to do there. For some people, their mission is in Israel, is in Eretz Yisrael, in our holy land. Some people, their mission is still around the world. And one is someone who was contemplating such a move, asked the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, I'm not going to stop you from moving, but I want you to think about something. Here, you're in an impure land, and therefore, if you mess up, you're messing up in an impure land. When you go to the Holy Land, it's holy. Sins that we do in the Holy Land are a much bigger deal because you're in a place that's holy. I don't want to say a much bigger deal, but you're sinning, and that's why throughout our history, when we mess up too badly, we get expelled from the Holy Land. Why is that was the punishment? Why couldn't we stay in the Holy Land, stay in our, right? The biggest issue facing Judaism, in relation to the Holy Land, is a lack of a sovereign claim. People say, because we were exiled 2,000 years ago, so our presence wasn't there the whole time. Why were we specifically exiled? Because a holy people acting unholy in a holy place doesn't work. There's a disconnect there. We get ejected. God willing, later this year, we're going to have a JLI course exploring this exact topic about why Eretz Yisrael, the Holy Land, is such a central part of Judaism. It is intrinsically holy, and therefore it plays a very important role. It's not just a homeland that we can move around or we can choose a different one. It is intrinsically holy, which is why it's such an important part of who we are. So on the inverse of that, in the diaspora, which is an unholy land, our actions bring God that much more joy. Just like making a comfortable place for the king in my basement makes him that much more happy if that's what he requested than in my dining room, which is anyways clean and set up for a party. There is no greater joy for God than the light and joy caused by transforming darkness into light when the light has superior quantity acquired by coming out of the vast darkness. In other words, the more the light, this faith, this God's unity is in a darker place, the more I express this light in a dark place, the happier that causes God. And so based on this, the Alter Rebbe in the last part of this chapter is going to explain an interesting verse. This is on page 10. V'zehu shekasav yismach Yisrael ba'esav. This is the meaning of the verse, let Israel rejoice in its maker. Now, by the way, those words start off the last of the 12th psukim. Another phrase that the Rebbe felt was very, very important for us to appreciate. We have to rejoice in our Maker. What exactly is this? What is this? What is this joy? Perush shekol mi shehu mizer Yisrael yesh le'dismayach b'simchas Hashem aser sos v'samech b'diyosim v'tachtenim sheheim b'chinas asiyah gashmidah. Whoever is of the seed of Israel ought to rejoice in the joy of God, who is happy and joyous with his abode among the creatures of the lowly spheres, who are on the level of actual physical asiyah. The word Yismach Yisrael ba'esav, in our Maker. The word Maker, Esav, is connected with the name of our world. In the spiritual realms, there are 4 worlds: Atziyos, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiyah. That's the world we're in. That's the lowest world. And so we rejoice, especially in this world. Because this is the world where God is the most joyous. Because this is us making our basement a comfortable place for God, not only the upper crystal ballrooms. And the Alter Rebbe adds further. The very word Eisav itself is plural. V'zeu shekasav be'eisav lashon rabin. For this reason, the plural form be'eisav is used. Why? Because in our world, who do we perceive as in charge? Who do we perceive as the makers of this world? Unfortunately, the forces of unholiness, which the opposite of God's unity is the plurality of unholiness. Right? That's an important distinction. God's unity, the opposite of that, is the plurality of unholiness, which is why unholiness, they all fight against each other. Unholiness is by definition separate, is by definition independent, right? If you have a bunch of idols, each idol says, I'm the one in charge. If you have warring factions, a lack of God's unity means that you'll feel like I'm the one in charge, no, I'm the one in charge, no, I'm the one in charge. And because that's what we perceive as our Maker, with big quotation marks, that's another level of specifically when I bring God's light into this world that has a plurality of makers, quote unquote, God forbid, that's an extra level of joy that God experiences. Shehu Eilam Hazeh Hagashmi, on page 11. Shehu Eilam Hazeh Hagashmi, Amalei Klippas V'Ter Achra Hanikar Shus Harabim V'Turi Deprida. This plural expression, makers, refers to our physical world that is filled with Klippa and Sitra Achra, which are called a public domain, i.e., a domain of multiplicity and mountains of self-separation, in that they are arrogant and separate from one another. God's joy and the fusion of the plurality is aroused when, through this faith in God's unity, they, the Klippa, are transformed into light and they become a private domain, i.e. a unified realm for God's unity. And that is the shot of adrenaline that we can work towards. Again, this is pretty lofty still. I'm not expecting us all to walk away perceiving God's unity and recognizing how our actions cause that to be real. We can work towards that. We can work that in stages. We can begin to understand what we don't understand. And to summarize this chapter, the Alter Rebbe wants us to look into our locket. If we're feeling unmotivated, if we're feeling like we need a shot of joy, think about the amazing thing that we are accomplishing. It's so amazing that it was given to us by inheritance. Because we have the ability to express and experience God's unity, how everything is really God. How do I do that? By doing mitzvahs. And that, just like if we have the opportunity to bring the king into our the king asks us, I want to come grab a beer with you in your basement. And now we have the opportunity to prepare it, to make a place where the king is comfortable. That would motivate us and give us the joy to knock out the job we have to do. And so too, how much more so, many, many times over, it is true when we refer to our mission and our role in making this world a resting place, a dwelling place for God, with God's help. That was chapter 33. And again, next week in chapter 34, we'll expand this idea and I think bring it a little more practical as we will continue next week, God willing.